This is not a sustainable way to be thinking about our bodies. We're going to burn out.
Welcome to the SheSpeaks podcast, a podcast created to elevate women's voices across diverse backgrounds on topics impacting women. I'm your host, Aliza, founder and CEO of SheSpeaks. Each week, I have a conversation with a woman expert who shares her best how-to advice on a topic so we can learn how to better do that one thing from a woman who's been there and done that. Our hope is that these conversations help you feel more inspired to speak up and be heard in your own life and work. Now, on to the episode. Welcome back to the show. Hope you're all having a great week so far. So here we are at the very end of March, and it is the end of Women's History Month. This is our last episode for Women's History Month, but of course we celebrate women every month here at the SheSpeaks podcast. But I have a great episode for you today. I am really excited for you to hear this conversation that I had with the wonderful writer, Jessica DeFino. Jessica has a very popular newsletter called The Unpublishable. She's written for Vogue, The Cut, Marie Claire, Self, and a whole lot of other publications. And what we talk about is the beauty industry. That is the area of expertise that Jessica has. And we talk about how it got started, how it's evolved, the Botox of it all, the new Ozempic, which is a diabetes drug that is now being used by a lot of celebrities to drop a lot of weight. And a lot of everyday women are using it now too. Apparently there's been a run on Ozempic in the US. So we talk about that and how beauty standards kind of evolved and where we see them going. So I'm excited for you to hear this conversation with Jessica. With that, we're going to get right into it. Here we go. I am very intrigued by the space you cover, the beauty industry. Let's start with what's wrong with the beauty industry?
Oh my gosh. Let's start with the word industry. I think the biggest problem with the beauty industry is that it co-opted the term beauty to describe a very flattened, one-dimensional physical ideal of appearance when beauty is so much more than that. And I think that's why so many of us are so pulled in by beauty, is because beauty is like this inherent human longing. It's a human urge. I see it up there with like beauty, freedom, truth, love. And I think it has really damaged us emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and obviously physically to be answering that like inherent human call with this sort of very narrow, impossible to attain physical ideal. I just don't think beauty can be industrialized.
Yeah. I mean, I have not thought of it that way before. And I'm grateful that you said that, because this idea of beauty, you're right. It's one of these words that like kindness and, these words that really should be our words, every person, every human being's words. Mm-hmm. And the industry, the beauty industry, has co-opted it and has made it this thing, right? And this ideal that is very hard for women to live up to. I'm curious if you can share your perspective on this. I do see that we have moved in terms of, certainly when I was younger, like this ideal of what we all had to do to be women and to look a certain way, that has definitely, I think, evolved. However, I think we are in a situation where social media adds this other layer of complexity in terms of what is considered beautiful. Can you talk about how you think social media is playing into the beauty of it all?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what's happening in terms of beauty standards and like the underlying forces that create the standard of beauty are the same. That hasn't changed. What's changed is our technology. And I mean that in terms of the technology of products and procedures. Like, obviously, there are a lot more things possible. There are a lot more ways to manipulate the human body. And so that accelerates kind of the normal baseline standard of beauty stuff that we have been dealing with for literal centuries. And then, of course, you add social media to the mix, and it's just, again, an acceleration of how media has informed beauty standards, since the dawn of Hollywood. I always like to say, when movies were a thing, obviously camera quality was very low in the beginning, and it created this sort of ethereal glow on actresses because it was blurred. You couldn't see them in high definition, and that kickstarted a lot of beauty standards of what women should look like. And we've seen that sort of evolve throughout the ages, and social media is just the latest iteration of that. And it's just that we're getting all of our input about what people look like, what they should look like, what we should look like, through a screen. So just the screen aspect of it lends a layer of removal from real life, from real people, from what people look like. And then you add all the technology that we are putting on top of that in terms of filters and Photoshop and Facetune and all of this technology. And yeah, it's just accelerating standards that have been in place for a really long time.
Yeah. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself that maybe one of the bigger differences too for us now, where social media is putting so much more content in front of us. There's so much more, even if we're seeing a lot more of the don't wear makeup, this is what I like, this is my beauty ideal. And it's much more natural versus we're still seeing so much more in terms of imagery,
Yes.
no matter what that imagery is, than we did in the past. And I wonder if what that does too is just in terms of top of mind. Like when I think about, growing up, I didn't have social media. Yes, I had television and, magazines and whatever, but I guess it wasn't like pervasive in my world, whether it's this ideal that is incredibly unattainable or like the counter movement of that, which is like, don't wear makeup and, and be really natural. Just the fact that we are now peppered constantly with that. I wonder if that is in and of itself is the issue, that we are forced to focus on this way more than maybe we used to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a huge part of it. I mean, it's just way too much information to take in. Our brains were really not designed to take in this much information. And I think it's human nature to sort of compare. And now we have so much more to compare ourselves to and to like do this like silent or not so silent, like negotiation with ourselves and judgment of ourselves and what we look like compared to other people. And it's like, even like you say, with all of the like, just be natural, don't wear makeup thing, there's always a comparison going around, and you can be like, well, I don't look like that when I'm all natural, so I can't do it. I have to participate. It's just a constant flood of information and suggestions and tips from influencers and tips from real people and tips from celebrities. And we're just, I don't think our brains are meant to hold this much information, especially when so much of the information is just like focused on the physical body. Human beings are so much more than that. And whether the message is positive or negative, we're just not meant to be thinking about our corporeal forms this much. Like it's too much. I think the other thing that like this flood of information has done in terms of like comparison is that, like you were saying, growing up with like, okay, we had media, we had magazines and stuff, but there was a layer of removal between us and them. So it's like, yes, of course you compared, of course beauty ideals existed, but there wasn't as much pressure to adhere to it yourself because there was this sort of removal where you're like, okay, I'm a regular person and they're a celebrity and I don't have to do that and I don't have access to that. What social media has done is like democratize all of this. So we're seeing celebrities as real people because we're seeing their casual, Instagram selves or TikTok selves, and we're seeing ourselves as celebrities. It's like, everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame on social media. So that layer of removal is gone and we feel pressured and compelled to look the exact same way as celebrities do because we're all like in this sort of equal-ish space on the internet. And I think that really speaks to the power we have as people to divest from that. Because, like, if you think of, like, okay, a celebrity, got Botox and lip fillers, whatever, that doesn't necessarily affect your life. But when your friends and your peers start getting Botox and lip fillers, suddenly you're like, oh, I should be doing this too. And the pressure is compounded.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk about that for a minute because I'm guessing that you can really provide an expertise on this and from based on your experience and perspective on the beauty industry that is more so than just my observation. But I remember relatively recently seeing that what we were now saying was like really like Botox would start with, women maybe originally like 40s and plus would start getting Botox. But then I saw that actually celebrities, young celebrities, in their 20s, late 20s, early 30s starting to get Botox. And what it does from a psychological standpoint, to your point, it's still celebrity, but when you start to see your friends who are in their 20s and 30s getting Botox, you start to think, oh my God, was that something I should have been doing? Did I miss some memo? Did I miss the
Yeah.
boat? Like, what is like, if you think about, well, like Ozempic is another great example, right? And I'm sure you know way more about this than I do, but it started as a thing that celebrities were using. People started to hear about it. And now I understand. I was at my regular doctor appointment, and the doctor was telling me there is a run on Ozempic in the US. Like it's almost like impossible to actually get it. And it's meant to be a diabetes drug, but now everyone is using it for weight loss. Just break this down for me. What is going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just how beauty standards have worked for a really long time. It's just we're exposed to more aspects of it now with like the media and social media, and we're seeing all of the behind the scenes thing. I'm actually working on an article now. This is actually the first time that I'm talking about it, about Ozempic being the new Botox. Because when you look at it this way, what's happening with Ozempic makes complete sense. Botox was originally developed to treat medical conditions. Migraines came later. It was developed like in the 1970s or something to treat a couple of other medical conditions. We noticed that a side effect of treatment was that wrinkles were being frozen, the muscles were being frozen, and people looked younger. And that started this big demand for off label use of Botox. And that's what's happening with Ozempic. This is an off label use of Ozempic to lose weight. It's not for diabetes, it's for an aesthetic purpose. And that's what happened with Botox. They eventually developed Botox Cosmetic, which is a separate line of Botox that is specifically meant for cosmetic use. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens with Ozempic, if we see some sort of Ozempic cosmetic come in the future, because that's exactly what happened with Botox. Like the playbook is there. And that's really what's happening with a lot of use of Botox and similar drugs today. It's actually only FDA approved for a few areas of the face. Doctors have permission if they think it will, enhance a patient's life to use medications off label. It's called off label usage. And that's what we're seeing with like cosmetic dermatologists and estheticians. They have permission in our medical system to do what they think is best for the patient. And that leads to a lot of off label uses of Botox, which has created a lot of inhuman and unattainable beauty standards that actually aren't like FDA approved uses of these drugs. And we're seeing that almost exactly happen with Ozempic. So that's kind of my prediction there. That's what I think.
Hi, everyone. We're taking a quick break to say that if you're enjoying this episode, you can subscribe wherever you're listening. We would also love for you to join the SheSpeaks community. It's free to join, and you'll get the chance to have first access to surveys, giveaways, sampling opportunities, and great content like this very podcast. All links are in the show notes. Now, back to the show. I want to go back to the point you made earlier because I think it was such an excellent, such an insightful perspective on beauty as it and I guess weight, all of that all together as it relates to why we, maybe the everyday people, are taking this on. You said that social media has kind of made us all feel like we can be famous, right? So, whereas in the past, celebrities, when they were in magazines and movies or whatever, it was a lot less attainable. But now that we're all on social media, overnight people become celebrities from their social media following, right? It's democratized it. And in some ways, that's a positive thing, but it has this downside
Yeah,
of the standards that we may have in the past thought were not for us. Like, I don't relate to that. Now we have to consider them.
exactly. Yeah, it's really in our face. And like the other thing is, it's not just that we're seeing more of it, it's with social media. We're getting the full breakdown of how to get the look, of how to look this way. We have dermatologists who are influencers now who are really, I think, abusing their power as people within the medical system to really reinforce these very unhealthy standards of beauty. And they'll tell you step by step how to look like a celebrity. We have plastic surgeons who are influencers. We have influencers who are taking you inside their plastic surgery journey, inside my Botox journey, inside my Ozempic journey. And they're trying to make it ethical, like I'm being transparent. But really, what it's doing is it's giving us a playbook for how to attempt to achieve this unattainable standard of beauty that, when you look at the data, is truly destroying us on a mental, emotional, psychological, and even like spiritual level.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. What are you seeing in terms of the implications to our mental health?
Yeah, mental health is a huge thing. And I always want to caveat this with, like, when I'm talking about the mental health effects of beauty standards, I don't just mean for the people who are actively pursuing them. Like, this is sort of a universal experience. Even if you don't buy into beauty standards, even if you don't think like this is something you care about, beauty standards affect how people are treated in the world, especially women. It creates a standard of beauty that feeds into politics, to economics, to our positions in the workplace, to our social relationships, our romantic relationships. And so, like, the mental health, the downstream mental health effects of beauty affect people who don't think they even care about beauty. So, to me, that's why I think it's so important. But we are seeing significantly increased amounts of appearance related anxiety, depression, body dysmorphia, facial dysmorphia, obsessive thoughts, disordered eating, disordered exercising, self harm, and even suicide that is associated with beauty standards, the pressure to adhere to an ideal that is, essentially unachievable and impossible. And it's really devastating us. I think you can look at, the recent study that came out about the mental health crisis in teen girls, CDC put out. There's a lot there to unpack about what is contributing to it. Phones and social media are a big part of it. We're seeing a ton of research come out about that now. What strikes me about that research always is that when it's talking about social media, what it's really talking about is beauty standards and comparing ourselves to other people and not being able to look like those people. Like, that's sort of the core issue there. And even if you don't want to come out and say, like, oh, there's a direct correlation between this recent study and beauty standards, because they weren't mentioned in that particular research. At the baseline, what we can say is people are more anxious and depressed than ever before. And we also have, more beauty products and procedures available to us than ever before. And so at the very least, the beauty industry is not helping. It is not a source of self-care and self-expression and empowerment that we're being told it is. At the very least, even if you don't want to say it's causing all of this, we can say it's not helping, because people are worse off emotionally than ever before. And we're more, quote unquote, beautiful than we've ever been.
When you think, though, and we talk about, I think that point you made earlier about how it feels like it is more something we need to worry about. Like, Botox started off as this thing that was really for celebrities and then became something, well, it was for initially for health, as we talked about, but then for celebrities and then to us as everyday people. And the same for some of these other things. It's amazing if you just think about that trend and how it's impacting us. Let's talk a little bit about your newsletter, The Unpublishable.
Sure.
How did that get started and what is the newsletter about?
How did it get started? I think it grew like more abstractly from a frustration with being part of the beauty media. I was a freelance writer. I was writing for publications like Cosmo and Marie Claire and Vogue and Allure. And I was seeing that there was a limit to what I could say. There was a limit to what I could report. My accurate reporting in a lot of ways was being edited or softened or cut or killed to preserve the media's advertiser relationships with PR people. Like the beauty media and the beauty industry are, 100% in bed together. Like the beauty industry is what funds the beauty media through advertising, through affiliate sales. And so I was seeing that there was a limit to the types of stories I could report and the truth I could tell because of this, huge conflict of interest. And it was really frustrating to me. That was in the back of my mind. And then when the pandemic hit, freelance writers, along with, everyone else in the world, took a really big hit. Freelance budgets dried up. I had a bunch of articles that were out in edits for other platforms that were returned to me. They were like, we actually can't run this anymore. I'll pay you the kill fee, but we're not working with freelancers at this moment. So I got to the point where I had 4 articles on my hands. I thought they were really important stories. I tried to pitch them out to other places. Nobody was biting. And I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to self-publish. And I called it The Unpublishable because I couldn't get these pieces published.
Oh, I love it. That's a great name.
Thank you. And the first article that I published there was called Where Are All the Brown Hands? And it was about racism in the nail care industry. And it got really big. It got a really great response. It kickstarted a media cycle of its own. It was written about in all the places that I had pitched the original story to, Nylon, Dazed. And that was really validating for me. I was like, people want to hear this. And if I can start the conversation, these beauty media platforms that I was trying to get so desperately to cover these important issues, like will cover them if I can prove that they matter.
I mean, it's requires also, well, it doesn't require this, but I think it probably shows is this recognition that you can build your own media following, right? You don't necessarily need these publishers, these magazines that are out there. You can kind of build your own following. And that's the positive part, I think, of the social media that we talked about earlier. There's the negative side, no question. But the positive is that you can build momentum on your own for your content. Whereas, 15 years ago, it would have been a very different story, right? So how can we as individuals, right, everyday women who maybe are listening to this, how can we change the conversation around beauty?
I think one is just like have the conversations and be curious and think critically. I think we need to open up our eyes a little bit and see the industry and its players, influencers, editors, celebrities for what they actually are, which is an industry. Brand founders are not your friends. Influencers are not impartial. They are part of this industry that is invested in getting us to be consumed by beauty and consume beauty in unsustainable amounts. And when I say unsustainable, I mean like for the planet and like for our brains. Like this is not a sustainable way to be thinking about our bodies. We're going to burn out. We have to question their motivations. We have to question our own motivations. We have to understand that we are steeped in beauty culture. I describe beauty culture as like diet culture's face-focused fraternal twin. So this culture has shaped our thinking. It's shaped our brains in ways that don't necessarily serve us. And to be able to like decondition from that, we at least have to be open to the idea that everything we think is not our own original thought. It's something that's been conditioned into us and it's not actually like serving us, I also think like the conversation has to be like, how can we care more about people? Like beauty standards are really harming us. And I think of it as like an act of collective care to divest from the industry and divest from participating in beauty culture when I can, because I know that me divesting makes it easier for the next person to divest, makes it easier for the next person to divest. And then finally, I just think we need to drop our defenses. Beauty is so intertwined with identity. And something that I have learned from the response to my newsletter is that we get really angry when we feel that our identity is in question or identity is attacked. And people identify so hard with the beauty industry. They identify so hard with this like facade that they've created, this superficial version of themselves. And to hear any of the tools of the industry critiqued or attacked feels personal. And it's not personal. And I think if we can all drop that layer of defense and be a little bit more open, this conversation could really change things.
So if people want to find you and learn more about what you're doing, Jessica, what is the best way for them to do that?
The only way for them to do that is through my newsletter. It's called The Unpublishable. The URL is jessicadefino.substack.com. I am off of social media, and I have been for like over a year now.
Well, now I have to ask, what made you decide to pull back from social media?
I mean, it was horrible for me mentally. I just was not good at getting that much feedback at that rapid rate. Much of it, angry from people in the beauty industry. I had also just gone into social media really hard, probably starting in like 2018 or something, because I wanted a book deal. And everyone I talked to was like, you can't get a book deal unless you have 10,000 Instagram followers. And I was like, well, the only thing I want to do in the world is write a book. So I don't care. I'll dedicate my whole life to getting these followers. And I became obsessed and I hit 10,000 and I kept going and I kept going and I kept going. And it was all consuming and it wasn't good for me. And it made me a worse writer. It made me like a less original and less creative writer. And I just saw that it wasn't necessarily helping. And so when the newsletter started taking off, I was like, this feels better. This feels healthier. This feels like, a good place to focus my attention that isn't destroying my mental health and my ability to think.
Well, good for you that you've also been able to grow your Substack with your newsletter without the use of pushing it through social media. That is a huge accomplishment. So congratulations on that.
Thanks. It feels good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for spending this time with us. I appreciate it, Jessica. It's been such a thought-provoking conversation for me. So I'm hoping that our listeners get a different perspective on the beauty industry and social media based on our chat today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Great questions. I loved chatting them out with you, and I really appreciate you having me.
If you'd like to learn more about our guests this week or how you can join the SheSpeaks community, check out the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening and looking forward to our next conversation. Thank you for listening. If you're an influencer or a brand that wants to work with us, please feel free to email us at info@shespeaks.com. Until next time.